Welcome to Economics Binoculars. For decades, the US economic model has been pretty straightforward. Import cheap goods, export dollars, run a massive trade deficit, and somehow still dominate the global economy. But guess what? That's changing fast. The US is now throwing tariffs back on the table, pushing for made in USA manufacturing, and trying to rein in its ballooning debt. So, what does this mean? Are we witnessing a massive shift in the global economic order? And more importantly, will this mean even pricier avocados at Chipotle? In this video, let's break it down into 4 sections. 1. How the US built its economic model. 2. The US hits the economic reset button. 3. The global ripple effect, who wins and who loses. 4. What's next? Are we entering a new economic era? Alright, let's rewind the tape and take a stroll down memory lane. In the early 20th century, the US was like that kid who wouldn't share his toys, protectionist to the core, with sky-high tariffs to shield domestic industries. But then, the Great Depression hit, and suddenly, playing alone didn't seem so fun. Enter 1934. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, in a bid to revive the economy, as well as to lift the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act that former President Hoover signed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, RTAA. This was a game-changer, folks. The RTAA shifted tariff-setting power from Congress to the President, allowing for bilateral trade agreements that lowered tariffs reciprocally. This act laid the foundation for future free trade initiatives, including the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which eventually evolved into the World Trade Organization, WTO. Take a look at this U.S. average tariff chart after Trade Agreement Act, RTAA, and even more importantly, 1947's GATT. The rates dropped very significantly and stayed low for nearly 8 decades. After World War II, the U.S. designed the Bretton Woods system, making the dollar the world's reserve currency. This meant global trade revolved around the greenback, giving the U.S. incredible leverage. But the real magic trick? The U.S. figured out how to sustain double deficits. A trade deficit, importing more than it exports, and a federal deficit, spending way more than it earns. How did the U.S. pull this off? Well, low tariffs. The U.S. welcomed cheap imports, especially from China and Mexico, while focusing on high-value industries like finance, tech, and Hollywood blockbusters. The move towards lower tariffs wasn't just about playing nice. It was about creating a strong domestic consumer market and becoming the ultimate consumption powerhouse. Americans became the world's ultimate shoppers. If there was a global Black Friday, the U.S. would be first in line. Meanwhile, the U.S. found other ways to flex its economic muscles, selling treasury bonds and selling weapons. While the U.S. ran a trade deficit on goods, it raked in billions selling military tech and weapons to allies. Okay, let's quickly summarize this section. For decades, the global economy revolved around this model. Other nations manufactured goods, the US consumed them. The US got cheap goods, low inflation, and economic growth, and in return, the other countries held US dollars and treasury bonds as safe assets. It worked, until it didn't. And now, the US is ready to shake things up. So why is the US suddenly flipping the script? Well, let's face it. The old model is breaking down. The national debt has skyrocketed past $36 trillion, and printing money, aka quantitative easing, has been pushed to its limits. Inflation has hit hard, and the middle class is shrinking while wealth inequality keeps growing. Meanwhile, wages haven't kept up with rising costs. Manufacturing jobs have been hollowed out, and relying too much on foreign production has exposed economic vulnerabilities. The 2008 financial crisis was a wake-up call, but COVID-19 made it painfully clear. America's economic engine wasn't running as smoothly as everyone thought. So, policymakers decided it was time for a hard reset. Now, enter the past few years, Trump, Biden, and now Trump again, all pushing for some version of America First economics. The old playbook being thrown out. Here's what's happening. Tariffs are back. The US is slapping tariffs on imports again in an effort to rebalance trade. The idea? If foreign goods are more expensive, companies will bring manufacturing back to American soil. Reshoring. In other words, bringing manufacturing back to the US. Reshoring can lead to the creation of new jobs in the US, boosting the domestic economy. Cutting down the deficit. Government spending is a hot topic, and both parties are starting to recognize that trillion-dollar deficits aren't sustainable forever. Reducing dependence on China. The US is pushing to onshore critical industries like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and EV batteries. Energy independence. With the US becoming a major oil and gas exporter, the old model of importing energy is shifting. Just like Trump said, drill, baby, drill.
We have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth, and by far. And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it. It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
This is a big deal. The US is no longer playing the role of the world's ATM and biggest customer. Instead, it's trying to be more self-sufficient. But can it really pull this off? This shift doesn't just affect the US. It shakes up the entire global economy. Some countries will benefit, while others, not so much. Winners. India and Vietnam. With companies looking for alternatives to China, Mexico, and Canada, these countries maybe will become the next big manufacturing hubs. But it all depends on how the US will play its reciprocal tariff cards. American manufacturing. If tariffs work as intended, we could see more factories reopening in the US. But will Americans actually take those jobs? Defense industry. As global tensions rise, US weapons exports are stronger than ever. Losers. China. With higher tariffs and companies moving production elsewhere, China's economy is feeling the pressure. Its exports to the US have already dropped. Europe. Many European economies depend on globalization. If trade slows down, their growth does too. US shoppers. Sorry folks, but higher tariffs equal higher prices. If you thought inflation was bad, wait until you see what happens when cheap imports disappear. So, is this really the dawn of a new economic era? Big question. Can the US successfully reverse its economic model? This strategy could make America stronger in the long run, but in the short term, it's causing a lot of disruption. If the US can actually reduce its reliance on foreign goods, cut its deficit, and grow domestic manufacturing, it could redefine global trade for decades to come. But let's be real, it won't be easy. Consumers love cheap stuff, businesses love cheap labor, and government spending isn't slowing down anytime soon. Short answer, reversing decades of economic policy is very difficult. Short-term pain is inevitable, but long-term gains could be worth it. Or it could backfire, and we all end up paying more for everything while the deficit keeps ballooning anyway. Either way, the US is making big moves, and the world has to adjust. Do you think bringing manufacturing back to the US is realistic? Do higher tariffs worth it to jeopardize the US relationship with other countries? Is the US actually fixing its economy, or just making things more expensive? If you find this interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because we're just getting started on these deep dives into the global economy. See you next time.